Hey everybody, today we are going to do an Aquatint demo, and I'm going to be showing you how to do a spray paint Aquatint rather than the traditional rosin Aquatint that you might be familiar with, which is what we have the option to use in the classroom. I've been using both methods my whole career, depending on the lab that I'm working in at a given time, and I've had perfectly fine results with the spray paint Aquatint. So it just takes a little bit of getting used to in terms of how you're applying the coverage to the plate. So to start with, I've decided to make a little spray booth, and again, I am outdoors, so to speak. I'm on a screened-in porch, so I've got ample ventilation. But I also do have some plastic sheeting that I can cover this with, and I have masks that I can wear. So you really want to be protecting yourself from the spray paint. What I did was I just took a box, standard box, and I cut a wedge out of the top so that I could flip it back so that I have better access to the interior. And then what I did was I just lined the inside with sheets of newsprint. And I have another sheet here to the side that I can just slip in, and this is something that I can take in and out, and I can replace it, I can turn it over, and that way you're not really ruining your box with the spray paint, and you can also switch it out whenever the newsprint gets too dirty. It is really important, in my opinion, to start with fresh newsprint, at least on the bottom level of your box, every time that you start to apply the spray paint, because you really need to have a visual of the amount of coverage that you're putting down with the spray paint. So the type of paint that you use will be determined by where you shop and your price point and everything like that. This was maybe 99 cents or 89 cents, I think, at a dollar store. I don't even know, like, it's a brand that I've never seen before, but it does work. The important thing that I want you to look for is something that says flat black or matte black, okay? You don't have to go really fancy with the paint. You just want something that is a dark enough color. This happens to be black. You could use blue or something like that. But you want something that will provide enough contrast with your copper plate that you can actually see it pretty easily. Okay, so that's going to be an important factor. I've protected my tabletop with a piece of cardboard. Again, you want to be making sure that you're not getting paint on things. This is the plate that we created in the previous video with the sugar lift. And so, it's been a couple days. I'm going to set this down here, and this is going to be what we work with. So the idea with the Aquatint is that you want all of the little tiny particles of spray paint to fall onto the surface of your copper. And you want them to be arranged in an even random pattern. So essentially we're creating sort of like a halftone dot pattern, just on a very, very minuscule scale, because the droplets, the particles of the spray paint are so tiny. And in order to achieve an even coverage, you need to have a little bit of forethought going into how you hold the can, how closely you approach your plate, and things like that. So I'm going to scoot this back just a little bit and angle it into the light so that you can hopefully see it better. Before I go on to the plate, I'm going to do a couple of tests so that you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm going to shake the can up really well. Get the lid off, and so if you approach your plate from a very short distance, you're going to get a really concentrated area, and you can see it's actually catching the light. Okay, so it's very wet because the droplets didn't have time to travel through the air before they hit the surface. And so if this was what your Aquatint looked like on your plate, the distribution of the spray paint on the surface of your plate, and I'm sorry, it's a little blurry, it's so covered and it's so solid that the acid doesn't have room to bite down in between each particle of spray paint. Okay, so the idea is that we're creating this halftone pattern, and the acid is going to be biting down into the copper in between every little speckle of spray paint. And then, you etch it for anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour, depending on how dark you want that tone to be. And then what happens is that the little particles of spray paint are actually protecting the plate. They're serving as a hard ground or as a mask for the plate, but they're so tiny that when you remove that and then ink and print the plate, those little tiny white speckles kind of disappear in our mind's eye, okay? And we see just an overall texture. And so the reason why I like to put some clean newsprint down into my box is so that I can kind of practice on that first, so I can actually see what my coverage looks like. Okay, again, I'm going to shake this up a little bit more. And what I prefer to do is stay 6 to 8 inches away from the surface of my plate, so that the force of the spray propels the particles forward. And in that time, they're in contact with the air, they start drying just slightly, and then when they fall onto the plate, they're less likely to splat and flatten out and become larger areas of coverage. They remain tiny because they're not as likely to hit with such force. So we almost want to like mist it down as if it's pollen falling on your car in the springtime. When you go out in the morning, your car is covered with pollen. It's just dust. So we want to basically be dusting the coverage onto the plate. So I'm going to practice a couple times. Okay. And you can see that some of the spray paint blows back. So when I actually do this, I'm going to be covering the box with a plastic sheet. It's just going to make it hard for the video, so I'm not doing that at this point. And I don't know if you can see because of the quality of the image, but I do have a very fine and even coverage on this area of the paper. And so again, it takes a few tries to really practice and achieve what you want. And one thing that you can do is lay a stencil down, like a little scrap of paper, so you can see the difference with each pass. And so you can apply the spray paint in several passes. Kind of blows it around a little bit. Okay. And so hopefully now you can see the difference between the first pass, which is very light coverage, and the second pass, which is the light coverage plus what I added to it. Okay, so for an average spray paint aqua tint that's just sort of like an even all over tone in your open areas of your plate, the standard is kind of, you want to aim for 40 to 50% coverage or above. Okay, so if you're doing less than 50%, let's say, the particles are going to be so dispersed, so far out from one another that you're going to have a lot of open biting in your plate, meaning that you're just going to have sort of like nondescript gray tonal areas of plate tone where the acid just bit down cleanly, across the whole plate, and you're not really getting that pocked, pitted texture that the Aquatint gives. Okay, so you really want to go for starting with 40%, and then you can build up from there. Okay, so if I were doing a single layer Aquatint rather than a triple Aquatint, I think I would go for maybe 60%. And so what that means is that 60% of the etchable area of your plate is covered with tiny little particles of spray paint. Okay, so you don't want to be, if it's totally covered, obviously the acid can't reach the plate. But you do want a really nice texture. And so the spray paint that you see on the newsprint really is a good indicator of the tone that you would be achieving with your plate, you know, the evenness, the coverage, and whatnot. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is put my plate in here, and again, if I were concerned about everything sort of like blowing out, I could put this on top, and maybe I actually will, because I don't want the spray paint to go on the camera. And so again, I'm going to shake it up every time, and I'm just going to sweep. I'm going to try to stay elevated a little bit, and I know that my hand is in the way, so I'm sorry, but you know, I just want you to see the action of how I sweep back and forth. I'm going to angle it down at, I don't want to angle right over, I don't want to be going perpendicular toward the plate with the jet of the spray paint. I want to be at a distance, not only above the plate, but away, you know, in front of the plate, so that, again, the force of the spray, the most intense, you know, moment of it happens before it reaches the plate, okay? So that when the particles reach the plate, they're going a little bit slower, they have a little bit more drag, they've already started to, you know, dry in the air just slightly, and that's how you achieve a very fine application rather than a splotchy application that looks like, you know, big gravelly speckles in your Aquatint. Okay. And so sometimes I even start in the back, because you can see that it's blowing back. You know, it hits the back of the box, and then it blows forward. And I'm just sort of moving the can forward and backward a little bit to make sure that I get the area of the plate that's closest to me, as well as the area of the plate that's further away from me. So I'm just going to close that down a little bit now. Let the spray paint settle inside the box. Okay. And I'm going to now pull the plastic back, and I want to see what's going on. So I mean, here it looks a little bit denser in the amount of, you know, particle coverage that we have. Here it's a little bit less so. So I didn't really sweep to this side as much. Okay, so now is my opportunity that I can go back and do that a little bit. What I might actually do also is carefully rotate my plate so that I can actually see. So yeah, this corner got a lot more attention. This corner a little bit less so. Back here, it's a little bit more even, so I'm not too concerned about that. I'm not going to rotate my plate just because I want to make sure that I'm still getting this area, but I just like to remove it so I can see the contrast between where my plate was protecting the newsprint and where it was receiving the spray paint. Okay, I'm just going to do one more pass. Close that down and let it just settle a little bit. And now, I'm going to carefully lift this up. You know, obviously you want to give the plate a few minutes to really dry before you touch any of the areas that you intend to receive the tone of the Aquatint. Since I have so much hard ground going around on the edge of this plate, I feel pretty confident that I can touch it even if the spray paint isn't totally dry at the moment. And it's very hard to see with the naked eye, you know, from the point of view of the camera, okay? What I like to do is get a little bit closer to it. I like to hold it in sunlight at an angle so you can actually start to see the particles sitting on the surface of the exposed copper. I can definitely see it on the hard ground also. So I know that it's there, I can see it, even if you guys can't really discern it very well. The other thing that you can do is get a little magnifying glass or a little loupe, like a jeweler's loupe, and they sell them also like in for photographers, okay, so when you're examining negatives and things like that. So you could look at B&H Photo. I think Renaissance Graphics probably has them. Takash, Printmaking Supplies definitely would have a loupe, I think, in their inventory. And that really helps identify the particle size, the distribution, the density of those particles on the copper if you really feel like you can't get a good read from the newsprint, okay? So I would let this set for a little while, maybe even 15 minutes would be sufficient. You could wait longer than that. You could do this and go back and etch it a week later, okay? So as long as it's set up and it's dry on the plate, it should be fine. The really important thing is that you don't want to disturb it, okay? So even though it's dried and on the plate, you don't want to drag your finger over it or really abrade the surface if you could avoid it. And what I would do now is make sure that the back of my plate is protected either with contact paper or packing tape, strips of clear packing tape. And then I would have my tail or whatever it is that I'm going to be using to fish the plate in and out of the acid bath. And then you can go ahead and etch it. So if I wanted to do a step etch, maybe I would put the whole plate in for about 5 or 10 minutes to get a light to medium tone. And then I could go back in with stop out or hard ground. Even sometimes Sharpie paint pens can be a good alternative. And I can cover up certain areas. So if I wanted to make some of these areas finer or give them more of like a three-dimensional texture by sort of reducing the etchable areas so that certain areas get darker than others, I could do that. If I see mistakes now that I don't want to etch, I would cover them up also. So maybe like that little mark right up here, I might cover up before I etch it at all. Obviously, all of these little areas up here, I think for the sake of this image, I would want to cover those up. And this scratch mark down here, I would want to cover that up too. So, if I were doing a step etch, I would etch it for 5 or 10 minutes, maybe even 15. Take it out, rinse it off very gently in a tray of water, just to stop the acid action on the plate. And then dry it carefully with a hairdryer on a low setting or just letting it air dry. And then I could apply more hard ground or stop out to different areas and then put that plate back in the acid and etch it for another 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever. And you could do that in increments to get a really nice gradation. Just keep in mind that anything that you mask out with the hard ground is going to have a hard edge on it, okay? So if you don't want any hard edges in your etched areas, I would recommend going and just etching the whole thing and then working subtractively after it's already been etched and cleaned off with a scraper and burnisher to bring highlights back in, to sort of smooth out that rough texture and bring highlights back into the tonal areas. Or you could even use steel wool and things like that. So there are ways to take it all the way to its darkest range and then work subtractively back into that by smoothing out areas, scraping, burnishing, and whatnot. Okay, so there are a lot of options. Obviously, you'll be learning about, additional approaches with litho crayon and things like that. So hopefully this will enable you to get a really simple spray paint booth set up at home. And if you wanted to use spray paint in the classroom on campus, there is a spray booth on the 5th floor, and you would just do the same system. There they have a professional spray booth with ventilation. Again, I would recommend putting down cardboard or newsprint under your plate and doing the same process. When you're done with the spray paint, this is the last step. It's very important to do one thing. So hold the can upside down, aim it toward the box, and just do one little blast, maybe another one, just to get any air out of the nozzle and to clear the nozzle so that the next time you go to use it, it's more likely to work for you, okay? That's it. Simple spray paint aqua tint.